are normally difficult, sensitive, and problematic to deal with. Because of the time constraints, my presentation is given. You can read it at a later stage. First, when we talk about gender-based violence, we should try to understand what causes and what contributes to people engaging in GVB. It is only when we understood what causes or contributes to gender-based violence that we can then come up with mechanisms to deal with it. Dealing with gender-based violence cases requires stakeholders to play a crucial role, to be mindful of what kind of staff you need to employ in your institution to be able to deal with GBV. Want me to do that? Where should I? We should understand the cause root of gender-based violence. We all know, and I don't want to repeat, as I said, poverty and vulnerability, and then cultural belief, and other factors which need to be considered. Now, to set up a GBV unit within your institution, you need to look the characteristics of the members you are going to employ within that unit. The first thing you should think about, it doesn't matter whether it's a male person or a female person, these people should have unique characteristics. As you know, GBV is very complex. You need to have people who have passion to listen to other people's problems. You need to have people who care to care for the survivors. It's not easy. They can withdraw, but you need to bring them back to work with you. And therefore, those two characteristics are very crucial. In Namibia, for example, gender-based violence have been ongoing. Women are killed on daily basis. Children are killed. It doesn't matter. It's a 1-day-year-old child. You wonder what drives our fellow citizens to do that terrible things to the children. We sometimes sit as prosecutors. We were leaving it to the social workers and other institutions to play a crucial role. But when we decided, as people who deal with criminal cases, we need to come in, and we started partnering with the international organizations to get the knowledge and see what is the way forward. And I can tell you, although we are not eliminating it entirely, we are making strides in dealing with GBV cases. Namibian government has also changed the regulatory framework. We have come up with laws. We have changed the laws because we should not wait for our laws to remain static. Law should go with the needs of society. And that is what we have done. Being reminded that we are partners in the global community, and Namibia have signed a number of instruments. I don't want to go into each and every legislation which has been passed. And then having laws in place, we then started to say, how can we deal with these cases? We introduced a fast track court to deal with the GBV. We have also sensitized our judiciary so that they can look into their laws and rules which governs the court. And happily, the judge president has amended the higher court rules directives and gave the prosecutor general an opportunity to approach him whenever there are those cases which needs to be fast tracked within the higher court system. But you know, things cannot move smoothly as you want to. The defense side are trying to fight each and every law you have come up. Currently, we have a case which has been dragging on for rape. And this accused person, through his legal representative, is trying first, he challenged the constitutionality of the provision which allows the witness to testify from a closed circuit television. Then he failed, and then he started going for the review of my decision to prosecute his client. Then he failed. He went to apply for the recusal of the prosecutor in the case. He failed. Now he's again launched an application to challenge the authority of that prosecutor, which was given by myself to represent the state. We are still in court. This rape took place in the vehicle. We went a mile another way to have the motor vehicle, which he used to rape the lady, being forfeited to the state. And we succeeded. You could see that whatever you try, there are always obstacles. However, these obstacles should not deter you from doing what you believe to be the right thing. Then we came up with other initiatives. That is the victim support mechanism. We have developed a handbook, which is called a Handbook for Court Support and Preparation Officers. As you have been heard, the lady who was speaking, that cases were being withdrawn. We took a decision that all GBV cases should then be supervised, and we should apply prosecution guided investigations where the victim decides to withdraw the case. That case should be referred to the head office. We call the victim, we sit with the victim. It's time consuming, but I have dedicated staff with whom I work with. And then you talk to the victim, you tell the victim the services are available for her, because we have what we call the Combating of Domestic Violence Act, which provides the victim, although there is a criminal case, that victim can apply for a protection order. Now, the protection order, if the couples are married, the man could be chased away from the house and pay for his own accommodation wherever he goes. Or if the lady wants to go out from the house and the children, he should be able to pay for the house where the family is going to rent and provide food, and everything which the lady needs. That is the only way we feel our victims can be protected. Now, the support victim, it's the in preparation, it's that you prepare the witness. As we all know, as prosecutors, the court environment itself is actually intimidating. If it's intimidating to some of us, the prosecutors, imagine what about the person who doesn't know, who never stood in the witness box facing the gallery. Therefore, you need to prepare, you need to take your witnesses to court, you show them what the witness is expect to happen in a courtroom. Then we have also a law for witness protection. The witness protection is normally designed to assist witnesses who fear for intimidation or for their life. And then, because our victims, some of them, they are coming from poor background, they have nowhere to go. We have then reached an agreement with the ministry responsible, which is justice, to ensure that our victims who are suffering have no job and they are suffering emotionally and psychologically can be assisted to go into that scheme and being um, protected as well. I have a lady currently, and that is the test how the witness protection services are doing to our victim. She then happened to get sick. And the first thing she did, she said, I want to see the prosecutor general. I was told I went to visit her. And then when she said, she saw me, she said, my sister, I'm happy you have come. You know what? They were asking me questions. And the person I put there as my next of kin, it's you and the prosecutor handling my case. Then I said, but I don't know your family people. What? I don't care. You are my family. Anything happen, you are there. And we don't take them to the normal state hospital because they need to be protected. It's a private hospital. You know how expensive it is. I said government, it's not easy. The justice system you have to pay. And that what is the government did. I appreciated the way she's being handled and how she's being protected. Then we have also the public awareness and education. We are participating in the public awareness and education of the entire community. Why are we participating? You know, we, as even the lady from UNDPA, I think, who spoke yesterday, was referring that we should try to deal with the causes of GBV to find out what are these causes. Now, in such a way, you educate the public, not only women and children, but every member of the society so that they can know. We all know that men generally, they feel powerful. They think they are on top of us women and children. We therefore need to educate them and say, let us treat one another equal. We are all have rights in terms of the Constitution. This is the Constitution. Look at what rights are there for yourself and also for women and children. And it's and that video It's part of our education so that our victims or survivors will not be afraid to approach the police station. You could see how the police were laughing when she approached them. That is the reality on the ground. That is how women were treated, especially when a perpetrator is very strong and have a position in society. The law enforcement agencies tend to be on their side and isolate the victims. But the situation has changed. In addition to what we have played as prosecutors, um, we engaged our donors, especially the UNODC, and thank you very much for my sister, Dr. Linda Naidu, who also have passion. You will see she has also taken part in that video, and her work with the Namibian prosecution and the law enforcement in Namibia is highly appreciated. It is with their assistance we were able to deal and come up with the booklet, and I have come with 2 copies, which I will leave with my brother, Mr. Pili, so that he can share and see what other colleagues are doing. We have also come up with a handbook called Standard Operating Procedures, Manual Gender-Based Violence and Violence Against the Children. This is a manual which is designed to assist the police, the courts, the prosecutors, social workers, and the doctors as well on how GBV cases should be treated. In addition to that, we have also come up with a quick reference guide for the identification of gender-based violence and trafficked persons. You know, I put this booklet there because human trafficking is intertwined with the GBV. There are similarities because these victims are all vulnerable people, and they sometimes are also dragged into trafficking because of the poverty and unemployment. We have seen how women from Africa are actually being trafficked, especially in um, Asian countries there, where they are promised to go and earn a lot of money. But what they end up, they are domestic workers, they are cleaning, they are locked, they have no passports with them. I experienced a situation. I went to attend a meeting in Vienna, and I was called by our embassy there to assist. We had our women who were stuck in Oman. Luckily, the Attorney General for Oman was there, and I engaged him. And luckily enough, he was really very good to assist us, and we rescued women there because their technology is at a higher standard. We were in Vienna, but he is able to show me the location and speak to these women where they are. And I appreciated what he has done very well. We have also come up with a national administrative based violence biometric database system. This is for us to capture, and our system is linked to the police division dealing with the GBV cases. Any case of GBV cases which is reported from any corner in Namibia, I'm able to view it on daily basis and direct what should be done. And it will also be able to give us a proper statistic and what happened to the cases when they go to court. Time is running. What I could say is that due to our shared borders, movement of our nationals, and intermarriages among nations, it has become crucial that the prosecution authorities, not only within Southern Africa, but in the whole world, need to stand up together to fight GBAV and femicide, which extends beyond our borders. We need to intensify regional and international cooperation to share best practices and strengthen legal framework in the fight of GBV. Our collaboration and international bodies like the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime ensures that we are not working in isolation. Together we can amplify our impact and create a unified approach to combat GBV. Thank you very much, Zambia, for inviting us to this conference. Yes, this is a very way in which we have renewed our mutual relations and now join hands to kick GBV out of Africa and by default in our own jurisdictions. We equally thank UNODC for availing dedicated professionals, especially Dr. Linda Naido, who has ensured that GBV is wiped out of Southern Africa. These partnerships are vital in helping us building on our progress and continue advancing the rights of women and girls, which will ultimately redress GBV. In conclusion, as citizens of the world, birthed by women, we have a shared responsibility to ensure that women live free from fear of violence. We must continue to challenge harmful gender norms, ensure that justice systems are responsive to the needs of survivors, and hold perpetrators accountable. Let us not get tired of whether it will take centuries for GBV violence to come to an end globally. Namibia stands firm in its commitment to ending violence against women and children and ensuring that the criminal justice system provides real protection and justice to the survivors. To our colleagues in Zambia and across the region, we are ready to work hand in hand with you, learning from one another and strengthening our resolve to fight this pandemic. Together we can and must create a future where women are safe, their voices are heard, and justice is served to them. Thank you. Oh,
Thank you so much, Advocate Imalo, the Prosecutor General from the Republic of Namibia, for that very insightful presentation. Our second speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is Ms. Lynn Kalim. She's the Assistant Director for the Public Prosecution Service of Northern Ireland. She's a seasoned prosecutor with experience in prosecuting cases of sexual violence, child sexual abuse, and drug-related offenses, among others. Ladies and gentlemen, help me in a round of applause to welcome Ms. Khalid.
Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. I stand on the protocols already observed and thank you once again for the invitation to speak to you about this subject this morning. So in this presentation this morning, I'm going to speak about the system that has been implemented in the jurisdiction in which I practice in Northern Ireland in December 2020. And this is our domestic homicide review system. And really, it does go to the topic matter that we're discussing today about the idea of the review of femicide to promote justice and a way forward in the criminal justice system. Thank you. So, the domestic homicide review system was introduced in Northern Ireland in December 2020 in an attempt to prevent future domestic homicides by establishing the lessons learned from previous incidents. And I'm going to discuss as well some of the changes that have come about in our jurisdiction as a result of the implementation of this system. Domestic abuse is a term which is used often to describe a range of behaviour, often used by one person to control and dominate another with whom they have or have had an intimate or family relationship. Most often, it is a series of incidents, abusive incidents, that has a cumulative effect on the victim and, in some cases, tragically can result in their death. In our jurisdiction, the definition of domestic abuse, which has been adopted, is that domestic abuse is threatening, controlling, coercive, violence, or abusive, psychological, virtual, physical, verbal, sexual, financial, or emotional, inflicted on anyone, irrespective of age, ethnicity, religion, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, or any form of disability, by a current or former intimate partner or family member. So you see, that's quite a wide-ranging definition, and I note that this chimes with the definition of domestic abuse internationally accepted that was discussed by our colleague earlier this morning in one of the presentations in the first session. Between the 1st of January 2023 and the 31st of January 2023, there were 33,071 domestic abuse incidents reported to police in Northern Ireland. When you compare that with our population size, it really becomes quite a dramatic figure in that we have a population of approximately 1.7 million people. In that same year, there were 17 homicides, 8 of which were as a result of domestic violence where women were the victims. This means that statistically, women in Northern Ireland are twice as likely to be murdered as a result of domestic violence than in any of the other UK nations. Internationally as well, it is recognised that this is one of the highest rates of femicide by a partner. As a result of this, there have been a number of changes in the law in Northern Ireland in the last few years, arising from the work of our executive to deliver an ending violence against women and girls strategy, which actually was formally officially launched just yesterday. And prior to that, there had been a previous policy by our DOJ and Department of Health, which was looking at stopping domestic and sexual violence and abuse. So one of the aims of these strategies is to address this very high number of domestic homicides which occur in our jurisdiction. The introduction of the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act in Northern Ireland in 2021 was part of the delivery of these strategies. This piece of legislation has dramatically changed the way in which the criminal justice system in Northern Ireland now views and responds to domestic abuse. And tackling domestic abuse is a key strategic priority for all of our criminal justice partners. This piece of legislation introduced a new domestic abuse offence, which became law in February 2022. This now criminalises a course of abusive behaviour, which can include controlling or coercive behaviour, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, financial and economic abuse. This now means that prosecutors can ensure that the full range of tactics which is used by an abuser to control their victim can be prosecuted as a course of abusive behaviour rather than as separate low-level incidents. This allows for increased sentencing opportunity then on conviction. We in PPS have also recently introduced new policy guidance on prosecuting these cases to assist our prosecutors. There has also been a very extensive package of enhanced training measures which has been provided to our police colleagues in Police Service of Northern Ireland and also to our prosecutors on this new legislation. As part of this work, it has been identified, and it's long been known internationally, that coercive control, strangulation or asphyxiation, and stalking are all high-risk factors linked to homicide arising from domestic abuse. The importance of these factors is now reflected through the creation of specific offences in our jurisdiction, which also have increased sentencing powers. As part of the strategy to address the high levels of domestic abuse which are prevalent in our society, and the very high number of fatalities also, the Department of Justice in Northern Ireland has implemented this domestic homicide review scheme. This came into effect in December 2020, and it's a statutory requirement now under Section 9 of the 2004 Act that a domestic homicide review be conducted in cases where agreed criteria are met. It should be noted that a similar provision has been in force in England and Wales since 2011. The domestic homicide review under Section 9 is a review of the circumstances in which the death of a person aged 16 or over has or appears to have resulted from violence, abuse or neglect by a person to whom they were related, a person with whom they were or had been in an intimate personal relationship, or a member of the same household. As I've outlined to you, these reviews were introduced as an attempt to prevent future domestic homicides by establishing the lessons learned from a death through an analysis of how local professionals and organisations worked individually and collectively to safeguard victims, thereby improving responses to domestic abuse victims, as well as their families and children. These reviews are carried out by an independent chair, appointed by the Department of Justice with support from a panel of representatives from statutory and voluntary and community organisations who gather and review information pertinent to the case. The process is essentially about learning within and between organisations to improve services and to identify the actions needed to change practice where issues are identified. The panel will seek out opportunities for learning regarding the way in which local professionals and organisations work individually and together, safeguard victims and address offending behaviour. We will consider whether there were any barriers to accessing services on the part of the deceased and how these issues can be addressed. And they will identify clearly the lessons to be learned and the actions needed to change practice as a result, and will identify how and within what timescales this will be progressed and what is expected to change as a result. The panel can also identify examples of good practice as well as dealing with the issues and can recommend changes to policies or procedures where identified. The chair of the panel has the power to issue requests for information to any organisation, agency or individual that it believes may have had involvement with the victim, alleged perpetrator and their family. The chair can invite on a case-by-case basis any organisation to join a domestic homicide review panel and to complete an internal learning review. PPS is not one of the specified organisations under the 2004 Act required to establish or participate a domestic homicide review, but where the victim or alleged perpetrator have previously had involvement with criminal justice agencies, we would expect to receive such a request, and in the majority of cases will respond positively to this. To date, we've received a number of requests, and there are a number of cases in the pipeline, but there are 3 cases in which an internal learning review have been conducted and 2 reports have been conducted and published. A domestic homicide review will not determine how the victim died or who was culpable. That is for the coroner and the criminal courts. It will not apportion blame or form part of any disciplinary inquiry. Crucially, the purpose of the DHR is not to look back and to criticise and analyse individual prosecutorial decisions. An independent prosecuting authority, it's crucial for the PPS that our role in this is not that we look back and second guess the actions of the prosecutor in light of later events. In the event that there is an ongoing criminal investigation and the perpetrator has been charged, then there will need to be very close liaison between the chair of the DHR and how it's going to be handled and the prosecution. So just very briefly to take you through the internal learning review process. As previously highlighted, we're not required to complete these, but we're likely to receive a request where we've had previous interactions with the deceased or the perpetrator. Most of these are paused until such times as the formal criminal case concludes to determine the guilt or otherwise of the perpetrator. The aim of the ILR is to allow agencies to look openly and analytically at their individual and organisational practice and the context in which the professionals were working at the time that those decisions were taken, and to look to see whether the homicide indicates that any practice needs to be changed or improved, and also to provide support for professionals to enable them to carry out their work to the highest standards and achieve the best outcome. Where changes are identified, then there are recommendations brought to the panel as to how these can be brought into place. It is important to emphasise that the purpose of it is to identify learning points for the organisation. It is not to dissect the individual decisions or to question the actions of the prosecutors. To date, we have conducted 3 internal learning reviews. 2 have concluded and 1 is ongoing. These reviews examined the murders of 2 women, both of whom were killed by a man who subsequently then took his own life. And I actually personally completed the internal learning reviews on behalf of our organisation in these cases. In order to protect their identities, they were given the names Ellen and Amy, and details such as when, where, and how they died are not included in these reports for this reason. The first report published relates to Ellen. Ellen, you will see, was killed by her adult son, who was a drug addict, after years of physical and emotional abuse. During this time, she was identified as being at high risk of domestic abuse, and although she and her son were known to a range of organisations, including police, the review concluded that partnership working within and across the organisations was limited, and this presented difficulties in fully understanding and addressing the safeguarding needs of Ellen. Crucially, chances to intervene were missed and responses were inadequate. I'll take you very quickly just to the second report of Amy before I conclude, because this was actually the second half of the internal learning review. Amy was murdered by her partner, a known domestic abuser, with whom she'd been in a relationship for a year. No incidents of violence had been reported by Amy during the course of that relationship, but the review in her case found that Amy suffered the ultimate act of violence by her partner. The threat of harm he posed pre-existed their relationship, and again, crucially, chances to intervene were missed. This review concluded, Amy's life and murder highlights the need for organisations and society to radically rethink how to address male violence against women and girls. The conclusions from these reports have shaped the governmental strategy to address violence against women and girls, which has been formally launched today. And I invite you all to take the opportunity to read this. It is available online, and also shaped the course of the new legislation, which I referred to at the beginning of this presentation. This has also led to enhanced training for the police and prosecutors and the introduction of the wide new range of offences which is now in place, as well as giving rise to additional support and measures to assist victims to give evidence in criminal proceedings against perpetrators of domestic abuse. It is hoped that through these changes and the commitment to tackle domestic abuse as a key strategic priority across all criminal justice organisations, that these lessons learned from the domestic homicide reviews will help to reduce that really high statistic and prevent deaths in the future through improved policy, practice and procedure across all organisations involved in our criminal justice system. I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Colleen, for that presentation. Our third and last speaker is Dr. Linda Naidu. She's a gender-based violence, child protection, and gender specialist with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime for the SADC region. She's a focal point person in gender and disability, in human rights as well as the protection against sexual exploitation and abuse. She was a finalist for the DO Global Gender Award. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Doc to the podium. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an extreme privilege and honor to be here today. I greet you, and I also recognize and acknowledge our esteemed panelists. So today, my presentation is going to be on femicide reviews, very similar to the model presented by Lynn. So I want to pose for your reflection some key questions on femicide. Do you see it a problem? How do we know it's a problem? Can we prevent it? And what are you in your institutions doing to address femicide? And what is femicide? So when we look at femicide, it's a tip of the iceberg of gender-based violence against women and girls. And if you look at the surface part of it, it's a very small part of the bigger problem. And if you look at the layered circumstances that lead to gender-based violence, as PG showed us in the clip on You Turn to Hope, a lot of discrimination exists within the systems of those people we entrust to deliver justice. Also within society, we have discrimination, we have inequality, we have stereotypes, practices that don't allow us to really detect the issue of femicide, and we miss it, as Lynn also indicated. And if you look at the layers that ultimately lead to the surface of femicide, we have initially, right, some invisible cues, subtle cues, and then they become more blatant, more visible to the eye, right, more explicit. And then we miss that too, until it ultimately results in the killing of a woman. And when we look at the diverse meanings of femicide, I'm going to predominantly focus on the killing of women because of gender. It's not that men don't get killed, but because of the statistics that depicts that women are being largely killed by intimate partners, known and unknown, and family members. It's a huge issue for this particular continent, especially. We're looking at, like I said, killings by intimate partners, family, non-intimate partners, sexual homicide, cultural and religious practices that lead to femicide, such as dowry-related killings, honor crimes, and other deaths of women due to levels of discrimination or their identities, such as unsafe abortion, female genital mutilation. The LGBTQI community is largely discriminated against. Sex workers in one particular country in the SADC region, we have a high prevalence of sex workers being killed, and then women killed by gangs and because of their disabilities. So the UNODC has a statistical framework that looks at globally what is happening to women and girls in terms of the issue of femicide. And it's definitely a gender related killing. And there's a whole lot of criteria that leads, operational criteria that leads us to provide um, global reports on the prevalence of femicide. And I'm not going to go into it because of time. So when we look at the prevalence of femicide, sadly, the continent where it is most prevalent is the African continent, and by far the highest prevalence, and predominantly by intimate partners and family members. Family members play a huge role as well in the killing of women and girls. Now, there are many responses that have been taken to address the issue of femicide, and it still poses a great number of challenges. For instance, the issue of femicide is not adequately understood. There's not enough political will and understanding to address it. There's a lack, especially within the African continent, of data. Now, PG also mentioned the piloting of the National Administrative Data process. So we're really hoping to be able to look at how we able to address the issue of understanding femicide and the numbers dictating our response. But just to say that in the legislation, in drafting the SADC gender-based violence model law, one of the huge issues that we have as well is that most of the domestic legislation doesn't cover femicide, it covers homicide. So we really don't know, at large, what is really the prevalence of the killings of women. So like I also said, inadequate investigations, impunity, insufficient measures to prevent and protect women and girls. And some of the responses in the region, in the SADC region, has been prevention strategies. A few countries have gender-based violence and others have femicide strategies, risk assessments, legal reform, protocols for investigation, data collection, also femicide observatories, and some look at the femicide reviews, but it has not been implemented within the African continent. And Lynn, in her presentation, mentioned domestic homicide review, which is a similar process as well. So when we look at the approach to femicide, it has to be a whole of society approach. Yes, we looked at over the last couple of days the issue of access to justice, our accountability, really looking at how we facilitate access to justice, prosecution and punishment, examination of femicides. But are we really doing enough? We have a culture of survivor or victim centered approaches, commitment to detecting and prevention. But does it really help? We are looking at strengthening the coordination, training, and programming of gender based violence. And importantly, we engage men and boys in the process. And so, with regards to a systemic approach, we look at holistically what do our laws and policies have to offer? How can it be reformed to address this issue? So there's different actions at different stages, uh, but also the monitoring and evaluation is an important part which is not adequately covered. And we look at joint engagement by all stakeholders. So this is a very important model to address gender-based violence and femicide, and is largely embraced. I'm going to look at the different sectors, and if you look at this particular slide, most of the responses are done and committed to by the criminal justice system. But if you look at the femicide review approach, it engages others beyond the criminal justice approach. We always blame the criminal justice system if there's a death of a woman. We feel they could have done more. But now we're taking it a step forward to say, let's look at a whole of society approach. Let's bring in other stakeholders so we understand the social context of femicide and get everyone to equally contribute. We know, we've heard about the research, the bystander approach, where people stand and look and never do anything to address this particular issue. We all play party to this accountability of stopping this issue of the killing of women and girls. So, why femicide reviews? It's an evidence based approach, contributed to many countries like Ireland. But in 2023, in gathering all of the evidence that we have across the world, UNODC provided a background paper to the Secretary General. And the Secretary General, in his report in reviewing the international norms and standards on crime prevention and criminal justice, advocated and recommended that there needs to be a strengthened approach to femicide, looking at everyone getting involved and looking at how we can embark on the process of femicide reviews. So it entails multi stakeholder processes, which we are doing, but a further, more in depth analysis of cases, looking at the social response, which we often neglect. But what's different about this approach is that it looks at multiple agencies, bringing in traditional leaders, which are very important in the African context, bringing in faith based organizations, but most importantly, bringing in the families. When we have a case of femicide, and when I speak to criminal justice practitioners, they are really traumatized by the case that they missed. They didn't do enough. Now, what happens to our communities who need healing? What happens to that family? There's no closure for them. And this process allows them to contribute to what went wrong in the systemic approach, what happened, who ignored and who didn't actually particularly pick up the cues, the invisible cues, and thereafter the visible cues. What could we have done better? And which system isn't responding adequately? So really looking at the limitations of what we can do better in this approach. So it really complements existing legislation, looks at how we can broaden our perspective and knowledge by bringing in families, social networks, faith-based organizations, traditional leaders, looking at a whole of society approach, but really looking at focusing on the state's responsibility to make this work. There are various elements that I'm not going to elaborate due to time constraints. So, although it has a diverse and more extended methodology, it's not unachievable. We look at how we can use particular systems and processes that we can embark on. For instance, in July this year, we invited all the SADC countries and we looked at how we can engage them on this whole approach, including Zambia. We had the Ministry of Social Services involved, and we looked at how it can be contextualized in the different country because it is so significant to embark on. It's not, like I said, being embarked on in the African context. In South Africa, there is an approach on child death reviews, but not on femicide reviews. And so you may think, how do we separate this from the criminal justice process? If you look at the criminal justice process, it's very separate. It focuses on the individual and the attribution of guilt. But this is a non blaming approach leading to ultimately the healing and the engagement of a broader number of sectors. It's a multi agency response and it's really looking at delving deeply into what lessons can be learned and improving our response. So, where does it actually play a role? How can we situate it? We have the killing of a woman, we have the investigation and trial process, the conviction, and then ultimately we embark on the femicide reviews. So, it doesn't actually really duplicate or contradict in any way the criminal justice process. It's quite separate from that. And there's many significant outcomes, and the evidence has been overwhelming as to how powerful this approach has been. It's improved our prevention and social awareness, improved how we train service providers, how we do risk assessment and management, self reflection on what we're doing and how we can actually improve but also advancing cooperation among agencies. It requires very minimum resources, but it also looks at how we can make it safe for communities to be involved in. So, can femicide reviews be introduced in any country or context? Absolutely, right? It requires political will, and because you've all ratified the conventions, your country has political will, I'm assuming. Safety, we need to make it safe as well. If families are not willing to, they don't feel comfortable, the perpetrators are still at large, we need to consider that they may not want to be involved. Existence of services, it can also look at how current services can be embracing to look at how we introduce this methodology. With that, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. We now go to our second segment of question and answer. I'll only take a few questions due to time. Any questions? Oh, it was very loud and clear. We have one. Please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Ramilamba Sitangwe, State Advocate from the National Prosecution Authority. I just had a question directed to Ms. Lynn Carlin. So I did note that the previous presenter, Ms. Linda, she had made reference to the Rowan, which I understand is a sexual assault referral center, if I'm not mistaken. I just wanted to find out because when you were presenting, I thought that probably they work hand in hand with the domestic homicide reviews, but that may not be the case. I just wanted to find out what has been set up since these have been introduced to reduce domestic homicide cases.
So the Rowan Centre really does deal exclusively with, yes, domestic cases, but domestic cases where there is sexual violence, and it's specifically where there is sexual violence. They just simply aren't able, you'd seen the statistics that I had given, to deal with every case of domestic violence that is reported in Northern Ireland. But where there is an incident of domestic abuse that involves an element of sexual offending or sexual abuse, then yes, certainly the victim will be examined at the Rowan Centre. The way that it's dealt with in relation to sort of the wider domestic abuse position and dealing with that, I had mentioned that there was an enhanced package of training that was rolled out, taking the lessons learned from the domestic homicide reviews, along with an analysis of how we were actually prosecuting and bringing cases of domestic abuse before the courts, looking at all of that globally and taking the learning from the internal learning reviews conducted in the domestic homicide review cases. It led to a change of approach. And it's something that we'll be talking about in some of our later sessions later in the week. Taking an evidence-led approach, which I think was actually your previous question in relation to domestic abuse cases, to try to maximise the number of cases that are being brought forward for prosecution with evidence that maybe doesn't necessarily come from the victim themselves. So that change of approach and change of strategy, combined with the new legislation that was brought into force as well, that provided us with increased opportunities to prosecute these offences in a number of different ways and for a number of differing offences, allowed us to train our prosecutors to best present their evidence, to choose the offence that's actually going to deliver the best outcome and how to approach that in the best manner possible, so as that the level of service that we are providing to victims of domestic abuse has significantly improved and increased. And it has increased the awareness of not only our prosecutors, but also the police investigators It has helped to develop a layer of specialism as well within police response officers who will be going out and dealing with these incidents, many of whom had never previously received any sort of specialist training. So it has allowed us to develop that specialised training package to both police and prosecutors that's informed by the lessons learned from the previous experience.
I'll take one more question. Okay, gentleman there. Oh, sorry, he's already been given the mic. Please go ahead.
My name is Samuel Mbamba. My question goes to the Prosecutor General, Namibia, and the Assistant Director, Prosecution Service from Northern Ireland. Has Namibia and the Northern Ireland moved ahead of Zambia to criminalize the deliberate infection of another person by a spouse or a partner with HIV, and to classify this act as gender-based violence? I ask this because there are many partners who have suffered this in marriages and other forms of relationships. And even in the very act of rape and defilement, this has been happening. Just over 2 years ago, I prosecuted a matter of defilement in which two children, one aged 11 and one 15, were defiled. The perpetrator was only indicted for counts of defilement, and yet these two children were also infected with HIV by the perpetrator, who was their brother-in-law, when they traveled to visit him during the holidays, school holiday. So has Namibia and Ireland gone ahead to enact laws to curb this, as we seem to be struggling here in Zambia with criminalizing this act? Thanks.
Thank you very much. No, we don't have a separate offense coming from the deliberate infection of HIV. But when it comes to sexual offenses, it's actually contribute as a factor which needs to be taken into consideration, what we call aggravating factors relating to sexual offenses. And if you infect a person intentionally without informing a person that you are HIV positive, and you go ahead to have sexual relations with that individual, and the person later has been infected, you can actually be prosecuted with a common law offense of fraud, that you have misrepresented such an individual. Thank you.
In Northern Ireland, the position is something similar to as outlined by my lady as to the position in Namibia. It's not a separate offence, but it very much would be prosecuted as an aggravating feature for the sexual offences, which would be presented on the indictment, and it is a relevant factor in whether true and informed consent was given to the sexual encounter that is the subject of the prosecution proceedings. It has also been prosecuted in it has been prosecuted in some cases as a separate assault, as it were, under the provisions of the Offences Against the Person Act, and also under our sexual offences provision, because, as I say, it goes to that issue of whether any consent that was given was true and informed consent. So I hope that assists to answer your question.
Okay. Thank you so much, distinguished panelists. It was an honor to host you. We really need to embrace the review of femicide cases as the scourge keeps on increasing. They say if you cannot change the circumstances, you better change the way you view the circumstances. So thank you so much. We'll come to a close of our session. A round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you, Mrs. Weza. Another round of applause for this panel and Mrs. Weza. We are not doing fine in terms of time, so quickly we'll move to the next session. In recent years, there's been a recognition the need to adapt judicial processes